Bullies tear new girl's dress. Big mistake. She's an unstoppable fighter. Marley Davidson stood at the entrance of Jefferson High School, clutching her worn backpack straps as students streamed past her like she was invisible. At 16, she was small for her age, barely 5 feet tall with mousy brown hair that hung limply around her pale face. Her clothes were simple and unremarkable, thrift store finds that her grandmother had carefully mended, and her thick-rimmed glasses constantly slipped down her nose. She'd transferred here from 3 states away after her grandmother's job relocation, leaving behind the only life she'd ever known. The hallways of Jefferson High buzzed with the typical Monday morning chaos. Lockers slammed shut, sneakers squeaked against polished floors, and conversations about weekend parties filled the air. Marley navigated through the crowd with practiced invisibility, keeping her head down and her steps quick. She'd learned long ago that drawing attention rarely ended well for someone like her. "Watch where you're going, freak," growled a voice as a muscular shoulder deliberately knocked into her, sending her books tumbling to the floor. Tyler Morrison, the school's star quarterback, stood towering over her at 6 feet of pure arrogance. His dirty blonde hair was perfectly styled, and his Letterman jacket proudly displayed his athletic achievements. Behind him stood his usual crew, Ashley Hendricks, a cheerleader with platinum blonde hair and a perpetual sneer, and Brittany Walsh, whose family's wealth had bought her popularity since elementary school. Marley quickly scrambled to collect her scattered belongings, mumbling an apology despite Tyler being the one who'd initiated contact. She'd learned this dance before: keep quiet, clean up, move on. But as she reached for her chemistry textbook, Tyler's expensive sneaker came down hard on her fingers. "I said watch it," he repeated, pressing down just enough to make her wince. Ashley giggled behind him, the sound sharp and cruel. "Maybe she needs glasses," Brittany chimed in, though Marley was clearly already wearing them. "Oh wait, she already has those ugly things. Maybe she needs brain surgery." The small crowd that had gathered laughed on cue, their entertainment coming at her expense. Marley pulled her hand free and clutched her books to her chest, fighting back tears that would only make things worse. She hurried away as quickly as her shaking legs would carry her, but not before hearing Tyler's parting shot. "Welcome to Jefferson High, loser. Hope you brought thick skin." What none of them knew, what none of them could possibly imagine, was that beneath Marley's meek exterior lay something far more dangerous than they could comprehend. For the past 8 years, since she was 8 years old, Marley had been training in mixed martial arts with her uncle Marcus, a former Special Forces operator who'd seen too much combat to ever let his niece be defenseless. Every morning at 5 a.m., she'd been in his garage-turned-dojo, learning techniques that could disable grown men twice her size. Her grandmother thought it was just a hobby, a way to build confidence and stay fit. She had no idea that Marley could break ribs with her bare hands, or that she'd memorized 17 different ways to render someone unconscious. But Marley had promised her uncle that she'd never use her skills unless her life was truly in danger. "The moment you throw the first punch in anger," he'd warned her, "you become everything we've trained you to fight against." So she endured. She stayed quiet, and she let people like Tyler Morrison think they had power over her. The first week at Jefferson High passed in a blur of minor humiliations. Tyler and his crew had marked her as easy prey, and they took every opportunity to remind her of her place in the school's social hierarchy. They accidentally spilled drinks on her during lunch, knocked her books from her hands between classes, and spread rumors about her being everything from poor white trash to a weird hermit who talked to herself. During her second week, the harassment escalated to the gymnasium. Marley had been excused from participating in volleyball due to a forged note claiming she had a sprained wrist. In reality, she was terrified that her athletic abilities would give away her training. She sat alone on the bleachers, trying to finish her English essay while chaos erupted on the court below. Tyler had convinced Coach Williams to let him help with the girls' volleyball practice, claiming he wanted to assist with training techniques. In reality, he was using the opportunity to show off for Ashley and Brittany while making Marley's life miserable. During a break in play, he grabbed a volleyball and launched it directly at her head with enough force to knock her backward off the bleacher seat. "Heads up, Four Eyes!" he shouted as Marley crashed to the floor, her papers scattering and her glasses skittering across the gymnasium. The impact had split her lip, and she tasted blood as she tried to gather her belongings with blurred vision. "Oh my God, Tyler, you could have seriously hurt her," laughed Ashley, though her tone suggested she found the prospect amusing rather than concerning. "She's fine," Tyler replied, jogging over to loom above Marley. "Aren't you fine, Marley? Tell everyone you're fine." Marley's hands were shaking as she felt around for her glasses, finally locating them several feet away, with one lens cracked. Through her damaged vision, she could see the entire class watching her humiliation like it was entertainment. Even Coach Williams seemed more annoyed at the disruption than concerned for her welfare. "I'm fine," she whispered, the words barely audible through her swollen lip. "Louder," Tyler demanded. "I don't think everyone heard you." "I'm fine," she repeated, raising her voice just enough to satisfy him. Inside, she was calculating exactly how many strikes it would take to drop him where he stood, but Uncle Marcus's voice echoed in her head, reminding her of the promise she'd made. The harassment continued daily. Tyler would trip her in the cafeteria, sending her lunch tray flying and covering her clothes in food. Ashley would spread rumors about her hygiene and family background, while Brittany used her social media influence to post unflattering photos of Marley that had been taken without permission. The rest of the school either ignored the bullying or actively participated, seeing Marley as acceptable collateral damage in their quest to stay on Tyler's good side. 3 weeks into her time at Jefferson High, Marley had developed a routine designed to minimize contact with her tormentors. She arrived early to avoid the morning crowd, ate lunch in the library instead of the cafeteria, and left immediately after final bell. But routines, she learned, only worked when other people respected them. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Marley was hurrying toward the exit when she heard her name being called from behind. Her stomach dropped as she recognized Tyler's voice, but she forced herself to keep walking. Maybe if she pretended not to hear him, he'd lose interest and find someone else to torture. "Hey, Marley, I'm talking to you!" She walked faster, clutching her backpack strap so tightly her knuckles turned white. The exit was only 50 feet away, but it might as well have been 50 miles. A hand grabbed her shoulder and spun her around with enough force to make her stumble backward. Tyler stood before her with Ashley and Brittany flanking him, their expressions predatory and excited. They'd cornered her in an empty hallway, far from any teachers or witnesses who might intervene. "That's really rude, you know," Tyler said, his voice carrying that false friendliness that always preceded something terrible. "When someone calls your name, you're supposed to answer. Didn't your trashy family teach you any manners?" Marley's jaw clenched at the insult to her grandmother, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I'm sorry. I didn't hear you. I was just trying to get home." "Oh, you were trying to get home," Ashley repeated mockingly. "Poor little Marley wants to run home to her pathetic life. What's waiting for you there? More hand-me-down clothes, government cheese, a trailer park full of equally worthless people." "Leave me alone," Marley said quietly, taking a step backward toward the exit. But Brittany had moved to block her path, trapping her between the 3 bullies and the lockers. "We're just trying to be friendly," Brittany said with fake sweetness. "You've been here for weeks, and we barely know anything about you. Like, what's your deal? Are you actually poor, or do you just dress like a homeless person for fun?" Tyler laughed and moved closer, forcing Marley to press her back against the cold metal lockers. "I bet she's one of those welfare kids. Look at her clothes. That dress is probably older than she is. It's like she raided a dead grandmother's closet." The dress in question was indeed old, a simple floral pattern that had belonged to her mother, carefully preserved by her grandmother and altered to fit Marley's smaller frame. It was one of the few things she had left of her mother, who died when Marley was 7, and wearing it made her feel connected to a parent she barely remembered. "Please," Marley whispered, hating how weak her voice sounded. "Just let me go home." "What if we don't want to?" Tyler asked, reaching out to finger the fabric of her dress. "What if we think you need a fashion intervention? This thing is so old it's probably falling apart anyway." That's when he grabbed a handful of the delicate material and pulled hard. The sound of tearing fabric echoed through the empty hallway like a gunshot. Marley watched in horror as the sleeve of her mother's dress ripped away from the bodice, exposing her shoulder and the simple white bra underneath. Ashley squealed with delight while Brittany immediately pulled out her phone to record the humiliation. "Oops," Tyler said with theatrical innocence. "It really was falling apart. Maybe we should put it out of its misery." He reached for another section of the dress, and something inside Marley finally snapped. 8 years of training exploded through her muscles like electricity. Her right hand shot forward in a perfect palm strike, connecting with Tyler's solar plexus with enough force to lift him off his feet. The air rushed out of his lungs in a whoosh, and he doubled over, gasping like a fish out of water. Before Ashley could even process what had happened, Marley's left elbow swung upward in a vicious arc, catching the cheerleader directly under the chin. Ashley's teeth clicked together with an audible snap, and she stumbled backward, blood streaming from where she'd bitten her own tongue. Brittany dropped her phone and tried to run, but Marley caught her by the hair and spun her around. A quick jab to the nervous cluster just below Brittany's ear sent her crashing into the lockers, where she slid to the floor in a stunned heap. Tyler, still struggling to breathe, looked up just in time to see Marley's knee driving toward his face. The impact flattened his nose with a wet crunch, sending blood cascading down his chin and onto his precious Letterman jacket. He fell backward, hitting the floor hard enough to rattle the entire row of lockers. "You crazy bitch!" Ashley screamed through her injured mouth, trying to get back to her feet. "You can't—" Marley's fist connected with Ashley's stomach, dropping her back to her knees. "That's for calling my family trashy," she said calmly, her voice devoid of emotion. She turned back to Tyler, who was struggling to sit up while blood poured from his broken nose. "And this," she said, grabbing him by the collar and hauling him to his feet with surprising strength, "is for touching my mother's dress." The uppercut that followed sent Tyler crashing into the lockers so hard that 3 doors popped open. He slumped to the floor, unconscious before he hit the ground. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. Marley stood over her fallen tormentors, breathing hard but otherwise composed. Her mother's dress was ruined, the tear exposing more skin than she was comfortable with, but she felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. For the first time in weeks, the constant knot of anxiety in her stomach had disappeared. Ashley was whimpering on the floor, clutching her jaw and staring at Marley with newfound terror. Brittany had managed to sit up but seemed afraid to move, her eyes wide with shock. Tyler remained unconscious, a thin line of drool mixing with the blood that pooled beneath his face. "Listen carefully," Marley said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made both conscious girls flinch. "You're going to leave me alone from now on. All 3 of you. You're not going to talk to me, look at me, or even think about me. And if I hear about you bullying anyone else, anyone at all, I'll find you and we'll have another conversation. Do you understand?" Ashley nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face. Brittany managed a small squeak that might have been agreement. "Good," Marley said, adjusting her torn dress as best she could. "Oh, and Ashley, delete that video. Delete it right now, or Tyler's broken nose is going to be the least of your problems." Ashley scrambled for Brittany's dropped phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely operate the touchscreen. When she showed Marley the deleted video, the smaller girl nodded approvingly. "Thank you. Now when Tyler wakes up, you can tell him that this is what happens when you mess with someone's family. And if any of you decide to report this to the administration, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you did to provoke it. Something tells me your parents won't be thrilled to learn their children are bullying kids whose mothers are dead." With that, Marley picked up her backpack and walked calmly toward the exit, leaving chaos in her wake. Behind her, she could hear Ashley trying to wake Tyler, her voice high and panicked. The sound brought a small smile to Marley's lips. Word of the fight spread through Jefferson High like wildfire. By the next morning, every student had heard some version of the story, most of them greatly exaggerated. The quiet new girl had supposedly hospitalized 3 popular kids in a matter of seconds. She was secretly a black belt in karate. Her family was connected to organized crime. She carried weapons in her backpack. None of the rumors were entirely accurate, but Marley didn't bother correcting them. Let people think what they wanted, as long as they left her alone. Tyler returned to school 3 days later with 2 black eyes, a splinted nose, and a noticeably subdued attitude. Ashley's jaw was swollen for a week, making it painful for her to speak. Brittany developed a nervous tic that made her jump whenever someone approached her from behind. More importantly, the bullying stopped completely. Students who had previously ignored Marley's existence now gave her respectful nods in the hallways. Teachers who hadn't known her name suddenly took an interest in her academic performance. Even the janitor, Mr. Peterson, winked at her when she passed him in the halls, having apparently heard the story and approved of the outcome. A month after the fight, Marley was eating lunch in the library when someone approached her table. She looked up to find a nervous-looking sophomore named David Chen, a kid she recognized as one of Tyler's former victims. Marley?" he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I just wanted to say thank you. Tyler and his friends used to make my life hell, but they haven't bothered me once since, whatever you did to them." Marley nodded acknowledgement but didn't say anything. David shifted uncomfortably for a moment before continuing. "I know it's not really my business, but I wanted you to know that there are a lot of kids here who are grateful for what you did. Tyler's been terrorizing people for years, and the teachers never did anything about it. You stopped him in 30 seconds. "I didn't do it for anyone else," Marley said quietly. "I did it because he pushed too far." "I know," David replied, "but it still helped the rest of us. So, thank you." After he left, Marley sat alone with her thoughts. She'd broken her promise to Uncle Marcus about never using violence unless her life was in danger, but she couldn't bring herself to feel guilty about it. Tyler and his friends had tormented her for weeks, culminating in an attack on the one possession that connected her to her dead mother. If that didn't justify her response, nothing would. More importantly, she'd learned something valuable about respect. For her entire life, she'd believed that keeping quiet and avoiding conflict was the path to safety. But sometimes, she realized, you had to fight for your place in the world. You had to show people that you weren't an easy target, that pushing you came with consequences. The torn dress had been beyond repair, but her grandmother had understood when Marley explained what happened. "Your mother would be proud," she'd said simply. "Not of the violence, but of you standing up for yourself. She never let anyone push her around either." 2 months after the confrontation, Jefferson High felt like a completely different place. Marley still kept mostly to herself, but it was by choice now rather than necessity. She'd made a few genuine friends among the other quiet kids, and her grades had improved dramatically now that she wasn't constantly stressed about being ambushed in the hallways. Tyler had never approached her again, though she sometimes caught him watching her from across the cafeteria with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. Ashley and Brittany had switched their bullying attention to safer targets outside of school, apparently having learned that some people fought back. On a warm Friday afternoon in May, Marley was walking to her locker when she heard a familiar sound, someone being shoved into the wall, books scattering across the floor. She turned to see Tyler looming over a small freshman boy, his old patterns reasserting themselves now that enough time had passed. "Pick it up," Tyler was saying. "All of it. And next time, watch where you're going." The freshman scrambled to collect his belongings, his face red with embarrassment and fear. Other students walked past, determinedly looking anywhere else to avoid getting involved. Marley felt the familiar anger building in her chest, but this time it wasn't for herself. She walked over slowly, her footsteps deliberate and loud enough to announce her approach. Tyler's head snapped up when he saw her coming, and the color drained from his face. His hand instinctively went to his nose, which had healed crookedly and would never look quite right again. "Problem here?" Marley asked calmly, though her eyes never left Tyler's face. "No problem," Tyler said quickly, taking a step back from the freshman. "Just no problem." "Good," Marley replied, "because I'd hate to think you hadn't learned anything from our last conversation." Tyler grabbed his backpack and hurried away without another word, leaving the freshman staring at Marley with something approaching worship. "Thank you," the boy whispered. Marley helped him gather the last of his scattered papers. "What's your name?" "Josh Martinez." "Well, Josh, here's some advice. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to show them you're not afraid to fight back. But pick your battles carefully and never throw the first punch unless you're prepared for the consequences." As she walked away, Marley reflected on how much had changed since that day in the hallway. She'd learned that respect couldn't be given. It had to be earned. Sometimes that meant enduring hardship with grace, and sometimes it meant standing up and fighting for yourself when pushed too far. The girl who had once cowered in fear was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own strength and wasn't afraid to use it when necessary. Tyler Morrison had torn her mother's dress, but in doing so, he'd unleashed something that would protect not just